right, everyone. Welcome once again to another episode of PTR Perspective. This one is a little bit special because I realized while preparing for this episode that this is the first time Saqib and I are doing an episode together. We have never done one of these since we started PTR Perspective. But today, the topic is also very special as well. We're going to be talking about how Trump re-election could shape the clean energy landscape and grid infrastructure landscape in the United States. Welcome, Saqib. I don't think you need an introduction for the podcast. You're one of the partners at PTR. Really good to have you doing this with me.
Thank you.
So, Donald Trump 2.0, second time in the office. What does that mean for energy transition? Maybe specifically, what does that mean for electric vehicles as well? What implications do you expect on the e-mobility ecosystem? With him coming to the office, with all the drama around that, all the announcements around it as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Mhm. Let's clear one thing, Hassan, that everything that we'll discuss today can be completely off. If you look at Donald Trump's first tenure, a lot of the decision making, especially around energy sector and foreign policy, it was impulsive. So for
Hmm.
someone to say that they can predict 100% that how things are going to shape is a wrong statement essentially. But we can already connect some dots looking at the statements that he has given throughout his campaign. And
Hmm.
secondly, the recent past, the cabinet selection. You can see that he has picked an executive from oil and gas industry, Chris Wright,
Hmm.
to lead the Department of Energy, who has called climate change activists alarmists, and he has said that we are not in the middle of energy transition. So one can start connecting some dots. With
Hmm.
regards to e-mobility, one thing is clear that the incentives throughout his campaign, he has said time and again that IRA, which actually from which the EV incentives stem from, that
Hmm.
will be he wants to repeal everything. But I think that's not going to be the case. We have seen a lot of analysis from other experts as well that completely repealing the IRA, it's not going to be possible. There are provisions there which protect parts of it. So what I think is that there is going to be adjustments in IRA.
Hmm.
Especially one thing with regards to EV that has been discussed a lot is the federal consumer credit for $7,500. I think
Yeah,
that is something that
big
definitely
one.
is at stake. The other side of it, the supply side, I think is less at risk,
Hmm.
especially if you look at the amount of investments that have gone into Republican states. You
Hmm.
name it, Ohio, uh, South Carolina, Georgia, a lot of investments, EV related investments from a supply side in terms of production, they have been in Republican states. So I think that part we can consider kind of protected.
Yeah.
Whereas on the consumer side, I think that's where there is going to be an immediate
Yeah.
action. And I
Do
think
you have a number on those investments? I think there's a lot of capital tied up as well.
yeah, I think it's like more than 200 billion US dollars in
Hmm.
terms of tied capital. So already committed, and I think that part as well. Since these are already committed numbers, that means that it will be very difficult to touch that.
Hmm.
Then on top of that, US's first buddy, Elon Musk. I think it's in his favor that he has said that in the past as well that the consumer credit, if that is repealed, that actually plays in favor of Tesla. So he has said
Hmm.
that openly in the past. So I think that is also kind of a proof that that's the part of IRA where we can see immediate action happening.
Hmm.
Let's talk about what does it mean for the industry. Obviously, it's bad news. I mean, there is no question about it. We should expect the growth to slow down.
Hmm.
However, it is not the end of the EV project as a whole. There is already hundreds of billions of dollars that are invested, they're poured into this project, and there is a lot of jobs tied to this. The other day, I was doing a keyword search on LinkedIn, with keywords like EV and e-mobility, and you know how on LinkedIn you can select the region as well.
Hmm.
In the US, it was more than I think 30,000-40,000 results I was getting,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
so we have a lot of jobs tied to this sector as well. So in nutshell, we should not expect this project to be shut down. There will be a slowdown for sure. And then during this process, a lot of the companies, with not so resilient um, business models, they will not be able to survive. That's for sure. We saw
Yeah.
that even throughout
Yeah.
2024, the slowdown, which was essentially caused by, in terms of the preferences from consumers because they
Mm-hmm.
wanted cheaper EVs. We already saw that some companies were not able to make it. So even
Mm-hmm.
even I think Trump and his team, they also know that it is a project which it has strategic importance. I relate that with US's in history. I relate this with US's space program, for example. There was a lot
Mm-hmm.
of criticism back then as well that is this something that is needed? But then you see that not only space program itself, but then the its impact on adjacent industries. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
industries thrived because of US's dominance in that
Mm-hmm.
aspect, right? So I think now Trump and his team would be aware of this fact that if they were to completely, shut down, so to speak, this project, then that could result into complete Chinese dominance, not only the EV sector, but then everything with
Yeah, I think the
with regards to
global
supply
element
chain.
is well, global
Hmm,
element is also very important, right? Like for US automotive sector to be competitive globally, because there is still like the push is there in Europe for EVs, in Asia Pacific for EVs, even to some degree Middle East
hmm,
as well, right? Like it's picking up on electric vehicles, the amount of Teslas you see on the road here. So I think very valid point on that, that if you want to stay competitive globally as well as an industry,
hmm.
eventually it's going to be EV.
Exactly, exactly. And then the everything that's adjacent to it, all the supply chains, right? Like for example, the other day I was reading that what's happening between Europe and EU and China right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's obviously escalation that is slowly, it has been cooking for the last few months. And I was reading that China, not related to EV industry directly, China has stopped supply of an element which probably a lot of our viewers, I didn't know much about this element, antimony. It's
Mm-hmm.
one of the elements on the element chart. They've stopped the supply of it, and because of that one element, it's one of the scarce ones. The adhesives industry in Europe is struggling, right? So all of that stems from Chinese dominance on the supply chain of all these materials. So
Mm-hmm.
I think the new administration, the new team also knows that if they were to not pursue this idea at all, or they were to halt this altogether, it has
Mm-hmm.
repercussions well beyond just EV sector. So I think they know that the importance of this.
So understood about EV OEMs, tier ones, tier twos. Let's talk about how do you see this trickling down to the EV charging industry, right? There was the NEVI funding, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure funding, which is basically the backbone of the EV charging infrastructure growth in the United States, right? What's the future of that? How do you see all of this trickling down to EVCI?
Just small correction, not across the board, the public charging infrastructure.
Only charge, exactly,
Um,
sorry. Public charging
so
infrastructure,
so
yes.
so it's definitely, it has been one of the most, let's say, important incentives. Just to set the base, it was announced back in 2021 as part of the infrastructure bill. The total funding was $7.5 billion, and then it kind of goes into two buckets. One is what you mentioned, NEVI, and the second one is the it's called, I think, charging and refueling infrastructure, CFI plan. So that is like 2.5 billion US dollars. One thing is that the deployment of NEVI has been extremely slow. Everyone has criticized it. There have been a lot of bureaucratic delays with regards to the deployment, and a lot of that was happening on state level. So
Mhm,
states are to blame. If you look at the number of chargers, so original plan back in 2021 for $7.5 billion was to have 500,000 publicly available charging points with this
mhm,
plan, right? So
yeah.
that's where it all started, right? But if you look at the number of chargers in place, it's really a fraction of what was the total plan. So it has been extremely slow. But if you talk about the funding plan overall, I think largely it is insulated from any mega changes, any massive changes. And once again, this is because of the fact that a lot of it has been already committed.
Mm-hmm.
because if things are already committed at state level, contractors are already involved in the processes, then at that point it is difficult. And the other day I read a news that a lot of different states are really moving forward with some of the things that were stuck, to make sure that whatever they can get by January 20th in place, they want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So but overall, I think NEVI plan and the other plan, CFI plan, they are not completely insulated, but at least the part that is committed. And then a
Mm-hmm.
large part of it has been already committed. If I'm not wrong, close to, I think, 3 billion has been committed already.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, in the first point where we were talking about EVs, I talked about how removal of the consumer credit kind of plays in
Mm-hmm.
favor of Tesla. This one here, Tesla actually has been one of the biggest beneficiaries of NEVI.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, there are some debates, there have been some debates that if Tesla's charger really fulfill all the requirements, there are some debates, some loopholes I think were
Yeah.
used in order to make Tesla um, fulfill the requirements.
Mm-hmm.
But here, Tesla has been one of the biggest beneficiaries. So I think that's another factor that kind of plays in favor. So I think with regards to EV charging, obviously, I'm not saying that there is a slowdown on EVs and that will not trickle down. I'm saying that things which are already in progress, the
Mm-hmm.
probability of them being taken away is lower
Yeah.
because there are some provisions that kind of safeguard these things
Mm-hmm.
which are already committed that will probably not be touched at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then work at state level will still continue. So that's on public charging. But when it comes to fleet charging, for example, I think that's where movement will continue happening.
Mm-hmm.
Destination charging, private businesses installing chargers. When you hear reports that businesses are reporting that they've had a higher number of customers this year because of EV charging, then that means that it's something that's not going to
Business.
require federal policies to incentivize businesses to install chargers because they see the impact of it already, right?
Mm-hmm.
So definitely, there is going to be an impact, but I think as far as the funding program is concerned, I think
Mm-hmm.
that is quite insulated, that is safeguarded already with the provisions, as well as the fact that a lot of it has been in process. Not to a level that everybody would have liked. As I said, there was a lot of slowdown, but I think things will be. It will not be business as usual, but things will be much brighter as compared to the overall EV ecosystem when it comes to EV charging
Yeah.
infrastructure ecosystem.
I want to go back to what you mentioned a while ago about the supply chains, right? There's a lot of discussion about trade tariffs. Of course, proposed tariffs on Chinese imports, but then also the US, Mexico, Canada, USMCA is also potentially up for renegotiation, right? Like it's on the cards. How do you see the EV supply chains being impacted with these tariffs kind of coming into place?
Once again, same disclaimer what I said in the beginning, that a lot of this is going to be snap decisions, I think. So what I'm saying should be
Mhm.
taken with a grain of salt. Um, First perception of blanket tariffs. I think not everyone understands this, Hassan. I have seen a lot of people getting this wrong, especially blanket tariffs.
Mhm.
People think that this is a penalty that is being given to the exporter country. Hey, we have taken our revenge. No, when it comes to blanket tariffs, the country which is exporting goods to the US, that
Mhm.
transaction has taken place already. So it is not going to impact that transaction. It's the
Mhm.
importer entity or organization in the US that is going to bear that. It's a tariff on them. So that's something a lot of people get wrong when it comes to blanket tariff, right?
Mhm.
So Donald Trump says that that's the tariff is the most beautiful word in the dictionary. No matter how pleasant it sounds, that's how tariffs work.
Mhm.
Essentially, what it means that the if the entity which is importing goods in the US is bearing those blanket tariffs, that
Mhm.
means they are going to try to pass these on to the consumer, right? And the argument that, hey, in this case the goods which are being imported will be
Mhm.
expensive, and then you have
Yeah.
locally produced goods which are cheaper. But then
Mhm.
uh, okay, are the locally produced goods, will they be cheaper? Like, um, think about, are Americans ready to buy a $2,000 locally produced iPhone? No. Is this
Mhm.
something that you can do overnight? No. So I don't think it's going to be, a lot of it is going to be blanket tariffs. I think a
Mhm.
lot of it will be targeted tariffs, and that too. I was listening to one of his latest interviews, where Trump is saying that his number one priority is solving issues like illegal immigrants. And
Mhm.
he said that out loud, that um, in addition to saying that tariffs is the thing that will make America great again and help recoup a lot of the money, he says that he will use it as a pressure tactic. So I think a lot of this discussion is essentially, these are going to be used as negotiation tactics with Canada, with Mexico. Having said that, we can already see companies are being extremely cautious. BYD had a big plan of setting up a manufacturing facility in Mexico that was paused.
Mhm.
Some of the Japanese manufacturers, they have already big manufacturing facilities in Mexico and Canada, so they are already thinking about how they can move. So here, uh, supply chains which are established, products which are established, that's where I think targeted tariffs will help. So automotive sector as a whole, not
Mhm.
EVs as a whole, if the tariffs are imposed, then obviously manufacturers who are manufacturing in Mexico, they will think about moving manufacturing back to the US as well.
Mhm.
We already hear some discussion from South Korean players to set up manufacturing facilities of parts with regards to automotive sector, right? So there is already some discussion, but one needs to realize that this is something that cannot happen overnight.
Mhm.
So broadly speaking, that this is one of the fact that the localization of production cannot happen overnight. On
Mhm.
top of that, that skilled labor, having the skills actually available in your country, it's a huge factor. We already see that
Yeah.
that's one of the biggest topics which is being discussed in the energy transition, that there is not enough skilled labor available.
Mhm.
I just remember one of the discussions that so somebody asked Tim Cook about, why do you have manufacturing facilities in China? And
Mhm.
his answer was that there is a misconception that we go there because of low or cheap labor. He said China stopped being a cheap labor or low cost labor location a long time ago. His point was that it's the availability of large quantities of skill in one place that really
Mhm.
matters to these CEOs, to these big companies. That's the reason why they go there. And Hassan, the amount of effort that China has put into material sciences, it
Mhm.
is unbelievable. I was looking at some stats that if you look at the what do you call the ranking of universities? It's called QR ranking or QS ranking. I
Yeah,
forgot the
the
name.
QS
QS
ranking.
ranking, right? So the when you look at different fields of study, material sciences, you in the top 10 in every type of material sciences, it's Chinese universities. So the amount of effort they've put in. Take machine tools, advanced tooling skills. These
Mhm.
are the vocational expertise that one needs in order to localize any type of manufacturing, and China
Yeah.
has done that. So if you are not taking all these factors into consideration, then it's just a pipe dream. That's just a wishful thinking that you're going to
Mhm.
be able to localize all the production. So in addition to the massive timelines which are typically linked with localization of production, one needs to also consider the availability of these vast quantities of labor as well, and
Mhm.
not to mention that you cannot localize entire supply chains. I gave you
Mhm.
example of China. I think in addition to that one element, there is also discussions of germanium and gallium, all these important materials, and China
Mhm.
has a very strong hold. So one needs to think that are tariffs just going to be enough to push production in the US? No, there are
Hmm.
other variables at play here as well. So doesn't matter that if that's the most beautiful word that Donald Trump thinks exists in the dictionary. You know, it's not the silver bullet to America's dependence on others with regards to supply chain for industries within the energy sector. So I think all these factors need to be taken into account. Tariffs
Hmm.
alone won't do it.
Okay. So basically, what you're saying is that because of all of these factors, you think the probability that there would be blanket tariffs, which impact the whole industry so significantly, is not that high if the administration is really looking at all of these factors. I wanna zoom out a little bit, and then zoom back into kind of a different branch of energy transition. Let's talk about the power grid infrastructure, right? It's another topic that we very actively cover as well.
Mm.
Um, Renewable targets likely will be affected. Fewer EVs being charged on the grid might mean different dynamics on the distribution grid. Um, Talking about the grid infrastructure market, do you see new administration coming into place really changing the dynamics of the power grid infrastructure market? When you think about transformers, for example, switchgear, for example, would that really significantly change, or do you think this is like just it's a small portion of the demand that might be affected? US is such a big market because we know, right? Like we hear all the time about the infrastructure needs modernization. We need to make sure there is enough resiliency in the grid, there's enough reliability, and that's why you need to make sure that replacements are in place as well. So what's your take on this? That what would be the impact on the grid infrastructure in the US or equipment market specifically within grid infrastructure?
I think it comes to power grid, especially transformer industry, probably this is not going to be a bad time for this industry. I think
Mhm.
so. First, if you talk about demand, I think the slowdown that we talked about, its impact is not going to trickle down in one day and tomorrow all the utilities announcing that we're not going to need as many transformers. No, I think they've learned their lesson. They know that electrification is a reality. They know that electrification like pockets of energy sector will be electrified over time. Today we talk a lot about transport sector. Tomorrow there's going to be a big discussion about heating, for example.
Hmm.
So everyone knows that electrification of energy sector across the board is happening, one sector at a time or two sectors at a time, but it is happening. And
Hmm.
electrical utilities have learned their lesson. Post COVID, we saw that how there was this panic buying, and then we saw what happened with the transformer industry. So I don't think that there is going to be a complete dial back from them on transformers. So
Hmm.
the demand of transformers is there. I think all the plans that we heard about and saw happening throughout 2023 and 2024 as a result of this crunch, many manufacturers planning or announcing to set up manufacturing locations in the US. It's purely because of that this demand is sustained.
Hmm.
um, and slow down from EV industry is not going to trickle down or have a big impact on transformer demand.
Hmm.
It's the end user, which is electrical utilities. They are not going to wait for another surge to happen
Hmm.
in future. And then we've already talked about how there is a massive overhauling of the power grid network of the US that is going to happen. The
Yeah.
resilience is a huge topic. So undergrounding, that I think that will continue happening. If anything, the roadblocks that were talked about a lot when it comes to implementation of some of these things, there were some
Hmm.
efforts during Biden administration as well, where there was some push for speedy approval of transmission projects, for example.
Hmm.
We have always talked about the interconnection queue for renewable projects. So everyone blames then the speed at which transmission projects are being installed. So I think these things will actually speed up. Because it's holding a lot of things back. It's impacting the overall power grid system, and which
Hmm.
then directly links with the national security of the US as well. So I think this industry is not going to face a lot of headwinds as compared to the other
Hmm.
industry that is EV industry that we
Hmm.
talked about. Um, over the past multiple decades, we saw that how US when it comes to transformers was dependent on imports, right? So with all these new manufacturing facilities planned in the US, I think it's a good time actually.
Let's
Is
actually talk about that as well, right? Like when you think about the transformer industry, as you said, historically it has relied on imports, right? More than half the power transformers are imported. Big portion of distribution transformers are imported as well. So if you put that into the perspective of what we were just talking about in terms of import tariffs and the US, Canada, Mexico renegotiation, do you see any impact on that? If you can go into more details on it.
Yeah, I think with that, once again, maybe the manufacturing facilities might be then moved to the US in addition to all the new ones that have been planned already. So we
Hmm.
might see that some of them also planning to move and set up shop in the US as well,
Hmm.
but not as big of an impact as we, think or talk about the automotive sector.
Yeah,
Purely because the number of facilities announced in the US, if you see
yeah.
the number of announcements, like more than 10 new
Hmm.
manufacturing facilities last year and this year as well. So I think that will continue.
Hmm.
The amount of dependence then obviously will start reducing. In Donald Trump's last tenure, I think there was this like one snap decision where there was a ban of transformers from China, which was then I think later taken away. I think
Yeah.
until something like that was going to happen with Canada and
Hmm.
Mexico. Other than
Hmm.
that, I do not
Yeah.
expect,
Yeah.
very disruptive changes with regards
Yeah.
to transformer industry.
Yeah, I also think that just like last time, there were the exceptions around power transformer import, right? I think this time as well, like even if there is some import tariffs, I think because of the lack of a local industry which is manufacturing so much today, unlike automotive, I think there would these this would fall under exceptions. So I think even in the like imports from Canada and Mexico would continue. Though I agree with you, I think if you're a Chinese manufacturer operating in the US, that might be bad news for you because there might be a tariff around that, just like
Mhm.
we saw last time. But I think you're right for most part. I don't think the supply chains would change so much in terms of USMCA. Okay, just concluding all of this. Um, any strategic advice to stakeholders in the energy transition space, right? When you think about the EV OEM, EVCI manufacturers, electrical infrastructure manufacturers, transformers, switchgear, both the ones in the US and the
Hmm.
ones who are exporting to the country, how can they navigate this changing landscape?
Mhm. Um, from EV industry, Hassan, I would say one of the points that I raised earlier, which was focusing more on state level. So I think a lot of the initiatives will pop up on different state levels. Like the other day, we heard about California's governor Gavin Newsom saying that even if the federal tax credit is removed for EVs, he would have one for the state. There is some political angle happening. People did not appreciate when it was highlighted that maybe Tesla was not applicable for that. It's all political. I don't think that's good for the industry overall, but I think keeping focus on state level can be very helpful. And
Hmm.
then other aspects such as fleet charging, I think that's going to be an important aspect throughout this time.
Hmm.
Um, and then one of the issues that we saw in the US EVCI industry was reliability. I
Hmm.
think a lot of companies struggled with that, having a resilient business model, having, ensuring that the reliability of the network. That was not the case. We saw, with a lot of companies struggling in the
Hmm.
US when it comes to availability of chargers. And I
Hmm.
think US consumer market overall is much more punishing than European, for example.
Hmm.
People are not going to take this as an excuse that this is the equipment supplier's fault, for example.
Hmm.
One aspect that I can think Another aspect that I can think of is that a company which is able to provide end-to-end solutions, a company which has complete control from engineering to final implementation, they can be in a good position. So for example, if as
Hmm.
an EV charger manufacturer, you are the one, like you're really the one designing your own power electronics, you're putting your own sensors in. I think that that those companies will thrive in this environment, because they can then
Mm-hmm.
really ensure the reliability aspect of it, and then
Mm-hmm.
they can control that who would they be partnering up with, because number of
Yeah.
available partners for you are going to be reduced now in this new paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
The number of partners that you can work with will reduce. Work with those allied countries. Make sure that your supply chains are can be diverted towards, if they are not already, they
Mm-hmm.
can be diverted towards allied countries. We already know that US has in the
Yeah.
past worked with, even in Trump's previous tenure. They continue
Mm-hmm.
working with certain certain allies, for example, right? So
Mm-hmm.
make sure that you diversify your supply chain. Make sure that if your supply chain is not linked with the allies of the US, you should do that
Mm-hmm.
already. So these are some of the suggestions that come in my mind.
Yeah, I think that just to add to that, when I think about, so it's a good summary from you on the EVCI and EV side, right? When I think about the power grid equipment manufacturers, like as we discussed, like there isn't much change happening. US is still a huge market, still going to be very much import dependent, like even after the manufacturing facilities coming up online. And the big bulk of market is coming from grid modernization. So that market would be there. Like I think you, of course, need to be a little bit careful, like which segments you're targeting. So probably oil and gas as an industry, automotive as an industry. Good to target today. Data centers, of course, are a huge market in the US right now. So I think like there is still good enough demand for you to operate in the US market. Um, Almost business as usual with a lot of caution, especially when you think about the renewable side, which is a small part of the business which was growing, but that part I think might still be affected. So you need to keep a close eye on how the regulation is changing. But again, start to diversify already. Renewables was your only bet, but there is still enough business between utilities and other industrial sectors that
Exactly.
you should be good to go. Great. Any other thoughts before we wrap up?
One more point that comes in my mind is prepare for market consolidation, as we talked about earlier. That even in this year where there was a slowdown, a lot of companies were not able to survive. So I think there would be then market consolidation, like things like larger charge point operators acquiring smaller networks, for example. That's something we should
Yeah.
be
And this is
anticipating.
specifically for the e-mobility ecosystem, or you think broadly for grid infrastructure as well?
For e-mobility, I think for
Okay.
grid infrastructure, that's pretty much, at least on the in the transmission and power transformer side, that's
Yeah.
already the case. So I don't think we should
Hmm.
expect a higher level of consolidation happening there.
Hmm.
But on the e-mobility side, I think we should be
Yeah.
expecting more
Yeah.
consolidation to happen in this
Yeah.
tenure.
Yeah. Although there is news that some companies might be up for sale on the power transformers and distribution transformer side, we will keep our mouths quiet.
Hmm.
I think that's a wrap. If you guys have any questions on what we discussed, please feel free to comment or reach out to either one of us. We're always happy to have a engaging discussion with people who are interested in these topics. Thank you so much, Sakib, for doing this. I'm happy that we did this, and I think we need to do more of these. Thank you guys
Of
for
course.
viewing the episode, and then we'll get back to you with more of these very soon.
Thank you.